Hi everyone, this is Amy Cooper from Rise, and I'm here today with Ben Rockwell, who is Division President of Chubb Middle Market. Welcome, Ben.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me, Amy.
Thanks for joining us. So 2020 is a crazy year. The environment is very different. How are you dealing with the current environment?
It is indeed. It's been a crazy year so far, but I think something that we've been trying very hard at Chubb to do, and I've been trying to do personally, while it's a very unique environment, it's really important that we really just stick to our routines and really try to go about business as best we can, given all the dynamics, given all the changes to working from home, but even with all that, I personally maintain similar schedule. I get up at the same time. I try to work out, get to work. And so really trying to create that sense of normalcy, I think, helps a lot. And then, it's off to the races, off we go. So
I think that is a great way to approach it. I know a lot of people that are trying to maintain their own schedule. So that's great.
Yeah.
Some of our young professionals are really curious and they want to know, how did you get into insurance?
Well, I think careers start by taking chances. And I was a psychology major, and I went to North Central College, which is a small liberal arts school in Illinois. And I got my degree in psychology and was all prepared to go to graduate school. And at the last minute, I decided I didn't want to do that. And so I was also involved in a mediation program through North Central. And one of the mentors of that program said, hey, I work in the claims department at Chubb. Would you be interested? You should apply. We hire college graduates. And so I was very intrigued by that. I did my research about the company and applied, and fortunately was hired. So I started about 24 years ago now in claims and did that job for 2 years. And then after 2 years, I actually decided to take another chance and switched, became a trainee all over again into underwriting. So I've done both claims and underwriting in my career, but I've been fortunate that I've been able to work with folks that have encouraged me to take a few chances here and there along the way.
So psychology major, that's definitely a different route.
It is. Although, insurance is an interesting industry in that some folks specialized or trained in insurance, but a lot of folks you meet, psychology, math, history, you see, it's always one of the more fun questions to ask folks at cocktail parties, how did you find your way to insurance?
Yeah. And so you started with Chubb and you're still with Chubb. Have you been there this whole time?
Correct. The whole time.
Wow.
The whole time.
Impressive.
Yeah.
So in your position now, I assume you do some hiring. Do you have, over the course of your career, a most memorable interview?
My most memorable interview was my first interview. It was that very first interview for claims that I mentioned before. And he asked me a question that I still remember to this day. And the question was, how are you going to respond to me if you and I disagree about something? And I thought it was a really good question. So here I am, brand new college grad, super eager to please, just trying to get a job. And now I have to kind of explain how I'm going to disagree with my future boss. But it was a great question, because the reality of the world is that we all have different opinions and different perspectives. And what's really important is how you learn to communicate those differences of opinion. And as you get into your career and you really become an expert in an area, it's important that you're able to speak up and articulate what you think is important. And so that's always stuck with me all these years.
And so do you have a favorite interview question that you use now?
I do. So I'm a fan of situational interviews. And what I mean by that is, so as we're interviewing for a role, I think a lot about the most common challenging situations we have in that role. And I'll set the stage with the candidate and I'll just ask them, how would you work your way through this? And sometimes it's a question, sometimes I'd actually give them some information that would apply, let them take a look at it and see how they react. And, it's been an effective way for me to really understand how the candidate will think through the problem which is important specific to that problem, but it's also just great to see how folks think through things and how they process and how they come up with an answer that they can then articulate to really reflect their point of view.
I love it. That's a great strategy. Another question was about what was your first management job?
I learned at a young age in high school really what servant leadership is all about. So I was a lifeguard in high school, and I then was put in charge of all the other lifeguards. And I worked at a big water park, and there were some really not fun, gnarly jobs beyond just watching the water. I mean, just stuff you did not want to do. But what I learned really quickly in that role is it's really important that you really shouldn't be asking somebody else to do something if you yourself can or won't do it. And so that was a great opportunity for me to think about that. And I learned a lot, even at the 17, 18 years old, in terms of how and what we ask and the work that we do. And as a manager, how important it is to really have a proficiency around the work, and then how that can translate into better coaching and development for your colleagues and your teammates. So I did appreciate in a much finer way the concept of servant leadership around some of those crazy jobs as a lifeguard.
I bet that was a lot of fun.
It was.
What advice would you give young professionals that are looking to move into management themselves?
The biggest piece of advice I would give is really understand your personal scorecard. So being a manager involves certain things, and it's really about are those things that you do what you're interested in? Is it something that you find enjoyment and engagement? And so would you be happy doing those things, dealing with HR issues and dealing with staffing and development and coaching? Is that really what you enjoy? Because something that's really important to me, and it's something important at Chubb, is that we need to create multiple career paths for folks. So being a manager isn't the only way to advance your career at Chubb. We believe strongly in a technical career path, and we've been very deliberate about how we build that career path that allows folks to advance and get ahead, focusing on the things that they really like to do in a technical fashion that may be different than what some of our career paths involve being a manager. So it's really important that you start with the candidate and, what's your personal scorecard and what you're interested in really doing.
That's a good point. I mean, a lot of people do think about the first way to advance is how do I become a manager, but there are other paths.
Absolutely.
Could you share with us the best career advice you've ever received?
So the best career advice I ever received was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, I would say. And it's don't be afraid of change. And I was in a job that was going well. I was interested in advancing my career, and I was speaking to actually the division president of middle market at the time, someone who's now retired, but we were discussing this job and I wasn't that interested in it. And he said to me, he goes, in order to do something different, sometimes you have to do something different. And so it was kind of this wake-up call for me that while I wasn't totally jazzed about that job, it did offer an opportunity to do some things that I've never done before and expand my skill set. And so I went for it. I was fortunate enough to get it. I did the job, had a great time. But importantly, it actually positioned me for another role that was one of my most favorite roles. And so while, I didn't at the time appreciate that, I look back on it and, it was important not to kind of fear that change that would come from something like that.
Wow. Well, I think we can all learn that. Something else that we young professionals like to know, and a question that we had from our group for you was, whose leadership style do you admire most and why?
Well, Phil Jackson is the short answer. He was the coach of the Chicago Bulls for many years. And so I grew up as a Navy kid. I moved every 2 or 3 years. I've lived all over the world, but I was a huge Chicago Bulls fan. And so I watched every game of both those championship runs, the first time and the second time. And the thing about Phil Jackson in both those championship runs is that he managed to pull together this tremendous set of success with the best basketball player in the world, Michael Jordan, and I'll go on record, I think he is the best basketball player in the world. But it wasn't until he put a team around Jordan that all came together. And so what I've admired the most about Phil Jackson is his ability to put that team together. And different players, different skill sets, some role players, folks having to step up. And so that ability, I think, is really what differentiates organizations. And so really pulling that together. But at the same point, the thing about Phil Jackson is he can adapt. And so while our styles, I think, would be very different, what I've learned and admired most about him is his ability to adapt. In fact, I had a coach in college that would walk around all the time saying GPA, GPA. And so as much as he was reminding us to keep our grades up, it stood for something, and that's great players adapt. And so that's something that's also stuck with me, my entire career, that ability to adapt. And I think, goodness, you started the interview with the question around COVID and what's going on in this world. And as you look around, organizations who have the ability to adapt and evolve, it's just so critical in business. And it's amplified today, but that's always been the case, is that ability to really adapt is critical.
Absolutely. And I love that that's your favorite leadership style. Do you have any other mentors that have helped you along the way, or a notable mentor?
I've just been really fortunate that I've had multiple mentors. As I mentioned, I grew up as a Navy kid, and so I learned quite early when you move into a new town and a new school or a new organization, how important it is to A, adapt, but then B, build a network to figure out what's going on. And so I've benefited from formal mentorship programs. I've benefited from informal mentorship programs, or just colleagues that have really filled that role. And then conversely, I think it's equally as important to be a mentor. I think you learn as much and you benefit from those relationships and discussions as the individual being mentored. So I've been very fortunate in that, and I've had that opportunity throughout my career.
Yeah. Mentors do play a really important part. So it's great to hear that you're also turning around and mentoring others.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to.
And so talking more just about talent in your organization, what are some things that you're doing to attract and retain talent?
Well, our people are our most important asset, bar none. And, in insurance, we're in the knowledge business, right? So, it's really your balance sheet and your underwriting knowledge, or your claims knowledge, or whatever your discipline is. And so it's super important that we attract and retain talent. And, at Chubb, there's some important aspects to that. One of them I've mentioned already, which is really folks having an opportunity to build their careers in different and multiple ways. Different career paths, whether it be managerial or technical. Diversity and inclusion is super important in terms of how we bring together teams of different backgrounds and perspectives and thought. And so I think that's super critical to attracting folks that want to be part of an organization like that. And then how do you build and develop teams so that they're empowered to make decisions? And in insurance, it's all about calculated risk. And so we're constantly working with our underwriters on training them and really arming them with the information they need in order to take those calculated bets. And as the interesting thing about insurance is it's so dynamic. So as an underwriter, you're evaluating these industries, and they're constantly changing, they're constantly evolving. And so, our goal is to really arm our underwriters through development and training and information to deal with this evolution and the complexity of the business that's constantly evolving. So we feel that when we devote the resources and the attention to these areas, that it helps us attract and then keep folks. As I mentioned, I've been with Chubb 24 years, and I'm certainly not unique around the organization in terms of the tenure that we have.
Yeah. And I actually even spoke with one of our RISE members who had been a Chubb trainee, went through the internship program just a few years ago, and to hear you talk and say that you got started by coming through that same program, it's pretty awesome to see that too, and to hear about the other things that you're doing to retain talent. Do you think you could share with us just, do you mind if I ask a personal question, what you like to do outside the office?
Certainly. Well, I do enjoy golfing. I'm not the best golfer. I think it was Hank Aaronson once said that, it took me 17 years to get 3,000 hits in baseball, and it took me one afternoon on the golf course. So that's kind of my golf game. But what I enjoy about it is a great opportunity to spend time with our business partners and our colleagues. So that's what I enjoy most. And I try to break away to play when I can. But I also have 2 teenage daughters. So and my oldest can't drive yet. So for anybody that's in a similar situation knows I spend a ton of time in the car driving, not as much lately with COVID, but driving to all the different functions and sporting events and after school that they both have. So it's a great opportunity for me to spend some time with my daughters. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Family's the best.
Yep.
So thank you very much, Ben, for joining us this afternoon. For anyone else watching this, you can go online to riseprofessionals.com and become a Rise member. It's free. There's tons of resources, and you can catch us on another one of these professional interviews next week. Thanks again, Ben, for joining us.
Amy, thanks for having me.